Hey, boys and girls, that's the sound of the bell, and you know what that means. It is time for another session of the Swing Academy. You're listening to the Swing Academy on jsmradio.com. Thanks for joining us. All right, everybody, welcome to this week's session of the Swing Academy. My name is James. I'm broadcasting to you from jsmradio.com, based in Halle an der Saale, Germany. Welcome and willkommen. Some of you who are first-time listeners, you might be asking yourself, wondering, what is the Swing Academy? What type of program is this? Where am I? What have I done? Don't worry. You're not on, you're not anywhere that you shouldn't be. But, if I was to boil down the essence of this show, I guess you could call this a music appreciation, maybe music education type of program. What we do is every week, for 60 minutes, I investigate and learn and research the life, the career, the music of a particular character from the history of jazz and swing. For the last few weeks, we've been really hyper-focused on some early jazz performers. Lately, we're starting to get into some of the second-generation jazz performers, and then we will eventually get into some of the swing and big band artists. But the point is that we are here to learn about a particular artist. We are going to focus on the music of this artist. I'm going to play 10, 12 different tracks from this artist. We're going to look at different aspects of their career and who their influences were, and then even go back to their beginnings. Where did they grow up? Where did they hear music? And who were what were some of the major influences on them. But to be 100% authentic, I want to let you know that I don't have a music degree. I'm not a professor of music. I'm not really a musician. I'm just kind of an amateur musician, but I love jazz. I love swing music. I love this genre of music. And I'm somebody who has a history of being a trainer and a teacher, at different times in my life. So I like to teach. I like the music. So I thought that I would just combine these two passions I have for teaching and for listening to music, and somehow combine them with another passion that I have, which is history. I studied history in university, so although I'm not I don't have a music degree, I do have a history degree. But I'm not trying to come off as an expert. I am just somebody who is interested in learning more about this genre of music. I'd like to know, who the greats were, why they are considered great. I'd like to be able, when I hear them play, just to be able to recognize the sound of their instrument or the sound of their orchestra when I hear it. To be able to do that would be, that's a great goal that I have. And so basically I'm just asking you to come along on this journey with me of learning, of discovery. I'm a rank amateur, pure beginner. I haven't even been a radio broadcaster longer than 7 or 8 weeks. So what you hear is what you get. It's authentic. I'm learning. I hope you'll take this journey with me and learn with me as well. So thank you for coming to this week's Swing Academy. I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy this week's show. All right, so this week's subject of our Swing Academy session is the legendary jazz cornetist and trumpet player. His name was Joe King Oliver, and he was known as King Oliver. This guy's a really interesting character. He was one of the early innovators and composers of jazz music, and he came out of New Orleans like so many of them did. He was influenced by Storyville. He was, just part of that matrix, which was New Orleans, where so many of these greats in jazz, where they came out, where they originated from. He attributes some of his early influences to Buddy Bolden, who was a subject of one of our previous Swing Academies. So he would be, King Oliver would be among this first generation of jazz musicians, performers, coming out of New Orleans, where, all of this is, brewing, this music and the attitude and the, everything that's in the air in New Orleans, the atmosphere. Another thing about King Oliver, besides the fact that he was a great musician and composer in his own right, is that his story and the story of Louis Armstrong are inextricably intertwined. You can't tell one man's story without telling the others, because King Oliver basically discovered Louis Armstrong. He mentored Louis Armstrong, taught Louis Armstrong, and gave Louis Armstrong, his first start in a band in New Orleans, and then later in his own band, when after King Oliver had moved north to Chicago. So most everybody, even people who aren't into jazz music, know the name or maybe even a piece of music by Louis Armstrong, but don't know King Oliver. So, in his memoirs, Louis Armstrong said that without King Oliver, jazz as we know it wouldn't be what it is. So, that's a huge statement. That's a really big statement, and I think it speaks to the influence that King Oliver had on this music.
The 20th century was not even 2 decades old when the first jazz record reached the public in 1917. But the world had already changed in ways no one could have predicted. And the unspeakable carnage of World War I was only part of that change. In the new modern world, human beings could fly. X-ray photographs could see through skin to bones. Sigmund Freud, listening to his patients as they spoke to him from a couch in his office, found new ways to understand the human mind. Pablo Picasso painted his subjects from every viewpoint, all at once. And Albert Einstein described a continuum of space and time. Jazz music became the soundtrack to that modern world. The music was still closely linked to ragtime, brassy and hard driving. Solos were virtually unknown. But when the First World War came to an end and the jazz age started in earnest, the music began to change. The story of jazz became the story of 2 great American cities. Chicago, where black New Orleans musicians found fame and a new white audience. And New York, where 2 very different neighborhoods Times Square, and Harlem played host to a group of dedicated musicians, each struggling to find his own distinctive voice.
So what have we got on tap for you today? Well, I've got some excerpts from the phenomenal jazz documentary by Ken Burns, some excerpts specifically about King Oliver. Even the Ken Burns story has parts of the Louis Armstrong story in it. So you're going to hear references to Louis or Armstrong, and you're going to say, well, I thought this was a Swing Academy session about King Oliver. Well, it is, but again, like I said before, you can't tell one story without mentioning the other. I've got about 12 tracks of music lined up, all of them recordings by King Oliver. Some of them written by him. He was a composer in his own right. Many of early jazz legends maybe weren't so prolific as far as composing or writing music. That wasn't the case for King Oliver. One of the most iconic jazz numbers, Dr. Jazz, turns out was written by King Oliver. I've got a bit of the modern jazz trumpet great Wynton Marsalis talking about the style of King Oliver, like what made his trumpet style unique or different. I've got, about 3 or 4 minutes of a jazz historian from the Lincoln Center in New York talking about, the importance of King Oliver. So I've got a lot lined up, and I hope you stay with me. I think this is going to be a very interesting Swing Academy, and I really hope that we come away from this session with a really deeper knowledge of somebody that is known, but maybe he's skipped over, because the next legends that come right after King Oliver were Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, those types of people. So sometimes the story of jazz, it's like, okay, jazz was born in New Orleans, and here's Buddy Bolden and Jelly Roll Morton, and you skip over like 10 years of the history to get to Louis, and we just kind of forget. So anyway, sit back, relax, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or a glass of wine, whatever you prefer, and let's learn a little bit together. And I hope you stick with me. So, without any further ado, let me present the subject of this week's Swing Academy: jazz legend, cornet and trumpet virtuoso, King Oliver.
But of all the bands Armstrong heard, it was the one led by the cornetist King Oliver that meant the most to him. Joe Oliver was a tough band leader. Rough as pig iron, one musician said. He had begun his career as a trombonist, then switched to the cornet, and became a perennial favorite at one of the city's toughest clubs, Pete Lala's in Storyville. Armstrong remembered delivering coal to one prostitute who lived next door and lingering as long as he could just to hear Oliver, his idol, play.
I'm Phil Schaap. I'm here to tell you about jazz. And right now I'm telling you about some special people who first played the music down in New Orleans. King Oliver is the one I'm going to speak of now. Joe was his name, Joseph. But he's known as the King, King Oliver. He's a New Orleans pioneer. He was probably born in 1885. I know his birthday, May 11th. The year is a little bit dicey. And he started playing professionally in the early years of the 20th century. And he became the most favored player of New Orleans music in New Orleans when jazz was only played in New Orleans. He played that really potent lead in the New Orleans Ensemble. And everybody wanted to have him in their band. That's really what King Oliver did in his New Orleans days. If you had a band, well, he was a star. You could hire him and he'll help your band be better. And then came this magic moment when the music was first played outside of New Orleans. Jazz musicians from New Orleans started to go where supply was limited and demand might be even larger. And this is the great migration of jazz music from New Orleans. Not that it wasn't still played in its hometown, but people like King Oliver, they shifted gears and they moved north. King Oliver was African American. He's really part of what's called the Great Migration, but he's also part of the great jazz expansion. When King Oliver got to Chicago, which he did in 1918, he kept right on doing what he had done in New Orleans. You got a band? If you hire the king, you got the best band. I'm your guest star. And he did that for a couple of years. But the practices of the entertainment business in a larger city like Chicago and in the North in general, and in the entertainment world more specifically, sort of suggested to him that he should get a band together. And this he did towards the end of 1920. He called his band King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. They're the most important early jazz band that I can name. And thankfully they recorded. It's important too, because there aren't that many records of the earliest jazz. There's nothing before 1917, and there's precious little in 1918, 1920, 21, and 22. But on April 5th of 1923, King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band went to Richmond, Indiana. It's not really a short trip from Chicago. Look at your map. And they spent 2 days there playing music that would change everything. King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band made records that represented New Orleans jazz as it was initially played in the polyphony of the New Orleans Trad Jazz Ensemble, and they played it optimized. But they also let loose the new configuration, the solo. King Oliver played 3 choruses of blues on Dipper Mouth Blues, and he also let Louis Armstrong, his protege, play some solos, like on Chimes Blues. And they had a clarinet player named Johnny Dodds. He could make stuff up too. He could take what they used to call a Boston, a solo. So with King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, you get jazz at its dawn from New Orleans, replete with a working band blessed with genius, delivering both contexts of the earliest jazz, all ensemble polyphony and the advent of the solo. And it might very well have been that King Oliver fellow, this great man, this pioneer, this mentor to Louis, who's a genius in his own right, who said, take out the melody and replace it with going for yourself.
So King Oliver would create vocal effects like this one.
Oliver was a big, impressive-looking man. He had a gorgeous sound, he had a lot of authority, and he knew how to put together a band. And Oliver obviously liked him. Armstrong was allowed to carry his trumpet, which was an honor, and I think he took him kind of under his wing.
I loved Joe Oliver, Louis Armstrong said. He did more for young musicians than anyone I know of. Between engagements, Oliver would sometimes stop on the street and offer Armstrong advice on how to play.
We'd be walking up Rampart Street and running into Joe Oliver. We might have a lesson or a piece of music that was bugging us. And I'd say, Papa Joe, how you divide that? He'd stop no matter where he's going and show it to us. But the rest of the musicians would say, well, I ain't got no time breaking the neck to get to the Eagle Saloon. See? That's why we all love Joe Oliver.
In 1918, the year American troops went to war, King Oliver left New Orleans for the big city of Chicago, and Armstrong took over as cornetist in his old band.
Then in 1920, the best thing that could have happened for jazz, they passed the most idiotic law in the history of the United States, Prohibition. Well, from a handful of saloons around the country, you now have thousands and thousands of speakeasies, especially in all the major cities. I mean, at one point, New York City alone, Manhattan had 5,000 speakeasies. And in the competition, you want to bring in people, you have music. So suddenly there's work. There's tons of work for jazz musicians. Also, Prohibition is loosening up morals. It's doing exactly the opposite of what it was supposed to do. Women, for example, did not drink in saloons. They sure drank in speakeasies. So the jazz age became a kind of umbrella term for this whole loosening up, this whole lubrication thanks to a prohibition when everybody was drinking more than they should, just to defy an absolutely unenforceable law.
Louis Armstrong was one of my first idols. And I really idolized Louis, and I wanted to be like Louis. And I read this story of how King Oliver had called him up to come up to Chicago to play with him. So whenever I would practice with my horn aimed out the window in hopes that Louis would drive by and hear me and hire me to come play with his band. And Louis never came by.
On August 8th, 1922, Louis Armstrong boarded the Illinois Central at New Orleans, bound for Chicago. He was 21 years old, separated from his wife, and finally going to join his idol, King Oliver.
The only person who could have brought him out of New Orleans was King Oliver. So when he got the telegram from Oliver, join me at the Lincoln Gardens in Chicago, his mom packed him a trout sandwich, he got on the train, and he was gone.
He carried only his cornet case and an old valise that held his patched, threadbare tuxedo. His mother, May Ann, made sure that he was wearing long underwear. She had heard that where he was going, even in midsummer, it was cold. Armstrong was joining an exodus of African Americans in flight from the suffocating poverty and repressive Jim Crow laws that continued to grip the Deep South. Since the beginning of World War I, hundreds of thousands of men and women had boarded trains and headed north in search of jobs and freedom. It was called the Great Migration, and most rail lines led to Chicago.
Now he gets to Chicago, and he gets off the train, and everybody's like giggling when they see him because he looks like an undertaker. He's wearing a box-back black coat, a suit, and his hair is kind of combed in the front, and he really doesn't understand city ways yet. It took him about 2 minutes to become the king of the city, but that's another story.
With Armstrong in the group, King Oliver's Creole jazz band never sounded better. The two men perfected a duet style by which Armstrong seemed instinctively to know just what his boss was about to play, and was always ready with the perfect complement to it. Nothing like it had ever been heard in Chicago before.
The word has spread around. Joe Oliver got a little second cornet player, and they're making breaks together and doing a lot of things together. You got to hear them. You know? I was interested in Joe Oliver, and I loved the way he played, and I practically know everything he played. So I put notes to it. Surprised him. I could make duets to whatever. I'll make a duet to that. And all the musicians thought that was great. They tried it and everything. But they didn't concentrate like we did. They couldn't do it. Unless they wrote it down. But we didn't write it, and never did write it down.
News of what Oliver and Armstrong were doing at the Lincoln Gardens spread all across the city, and soon a few white listeners came to hear them as well.
As the door opened, the trumpets, King and Louis, one or both, soared above everything else. The whole joint was rocking. Tables, chairs, walls, people moved with the rhythm. It was hypnosis at first hearing. Armstrong seemed able to hear what Oliver was improvising and reproduce it himself at the same time. Then the two wove around each other like suspicious women, talking about the same man, Eddie Condon.
One dazzled young musician remembered there was so much music in the air that if you held up a horn, it would play by itself. On April 5th, 1923, King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, and the Creole Jazz Band took the train from Chicago to Richmond, Indiana, home of Gannett Records. Louis Armstrong was about to be recorded for the first time.
The band you used to record around a horn, and then you would cut the sound into a wax disc. They couldn't work with Armstrong standing around the horn because he overpowered everybody else in the band, so that he had to stand 10, 15 feet behind the rest of them. They had to open a door and have him in the hallway so that his sound would be balanced against the other musicians. They make a record, and I think this is unquestionably a landmark moment in the history of jazz, called Chimes Blues. Armstrong is assigned as his first solo the trio strain. He's not required or asked, nor do they desire him to improvise a single note. But he plays this trio strain with such bravura and such rhythmic intensity that when you listen to it, you hear the future. It's more intense and exciting than all the improvisation that the entire ensemble is doing around him. And that might, that holy sound that he has, at that moment, you know that something is in the works and it's never going to be contained. And it's only 2 years later that he finally goes into the studio under his own steam and virtually codifies what jazz is going to be for the next half century.
You are listening to the Swing Academy, hosted by your friend and your guide for the next hour or so, James Udall, and you're listening to JSMRadio.com. All right, so I've got the music of King Oliver lined up now. There's about 12 tracks. We're going to start with his most iconic piece, I think, which is called Dr. Jazz. There's another one called Riverfront Stomp, and then 10 other tracks. If you'd like to have the track list of this music, email me here at the station, and I'll send you the complete track list and the albums from where I found this music. My email address is james.udall, UDALL, at jsmradio.com, and I'd be happy to respond to any requests for the track list, or if you have comments about the show, both positive, negative. if you have questions about King Oliver, I'd be happy to answer them. So do reach out. I would really appreciate that. You can also get me on Facebook. My Facebook account is just my name, James Udall, and my Facebook page is easy to find, and you can send me a private message or post to my page. So here we go with the music. Joe Oliver's style is very distinctive, as you heard with Wynton Marsalis. He uses a lot of different styles of mutes that give his trumpet and cornet a very distinctive style. And again, we heard about the influence that King Oliver had on Louis Armstrong. So here's the music. I hope you enjoy it. I'll check back with you on the back end of these tracks, and we'll do a couple other things before we run out of time. So here's the music of King Oliver.
My name is John Eric Kelso, and I'd like to talk to you about how the trumpet player sets up the endings in a New Orleans-style jazz band. There are several different kinds of endings that are traditional endings in traditional jazz, and the trumpet player often is the one that dictates which ending is going to be happening. And often it's just, people are just listening to you for the ending. It's not necessarily preordained, unless you're playing with a band that has what we call head arrangements, where you've come up with arrangements over time just without writing them down. Or they just maybe are referring to a certain recording that's their favorite recording of that song, or paying a tribute to a certain artist who did the song a certain way. The easiest and most simple ending is what we call just straight out. Taking it straight out means there's no added beats, no added measures at the end of the phrase, at the end of the performance. That could end with a hold, a chord that's held, or it could just go straight out. And I'll try and demonstrate a couple of ways that that will happen. So that's straight out, no hold. The drummer might hit a choke cymbal or something on beat 4 after you hit beat 3 like that on the last measure. And here's a variation. So sometimes you'll put a hold on it. Maybe somebody else in the band will think there should be a hold on it, and you've already stopped, and just join in on the hold. And hopefully nobody will leave you hanging, holding a note, and you'll be the only one. That can be a little bit embarrassing. But if they're listening, if it's a good band, they'll hear you do that, and they'll make you look good. Another ending in traditional jazz bands goes by various different names. Some people call it the King Oliver ending. Some people call it a double ending. I've heard it referred to as a Firehouse 5 ending. And what this is, basically just adding another 2 bars of the 1 chord, or the 1 and 5 chord, at the end of a phrase. And I'll demonstrate to you what the trumpet player might do in one of those. And another way of doing that, I'll just play the last 4 of that type of ending. The idea is with that ending, if you're expressing it to the band just musically without having talked about it beforehand, is you play a figure that doesn't sound like an ending until it actually ends. So if you pick a note like I did there, that's a leading note, it'll help the band to understand that. Now, of course, the band has to know that that is a possible ending. So you have to kind of know who you're playing with and know that they have done that ending before, or they have at least heard that type of ending before. One of the ways that the New Orleans bands used to, and still signal that, the trumpet player would actually stomp his foot twice right before that. So he's playing along and he goes, and that means look out, double ending coming. So a lot of experienced traditional jazz musicians will know what you mean if you do that. Another ending that's a standard ending that you should know about and know how to lead is sometimes called the Sweet Mama ending, although a lot of people haven't heard that name. That's kind of from way, way back. But it's just a turnaround ending, and I'll demonstrate. So basically what that one does, instead of going straight out, it goes from the tonic chord, the 1 chord, to the 6 chord, and that would be a 6 dominant chord, to the 2, to the 5, to the 1. So it just adds a couple of bars on to the ending. A lot of singers end songs this way. And you hear that often in some more modern styles of jazz. And sometimes they just keep it going as a turnaround ending. Miles Davis did that a lot. So that's a place where you might have heard something like that, although, of course, the style of the lead would be different. And I'm just improvising some examples of what you could do. It's not the notes that you should play, but I'm just trying to give you the idea of the shape of the ending, the kind of lead phrases that you can play that will signal to the musicians what you have in mind. Another variation of the double ending or King Oliver ending is the way that Louis Armstrong did it, which was a little different from these other versions that I just demonstrated. This is the same length, but the trumpet player holds one note through most of the ending, while the other guys do a lot of active stuff. The trombone player is moving around, the clarinet player or whoever else is in the band is doing the active part, and you're just laying on one note. Let me see if I can demonstrate. So that's the same length, but it's just the trumpet just kind of holds on to one note, and you still end on beat 3 of the last measure. The other variation on these type of endings, any of these endings, is that you end on the and of 2 on the last measure. That's a little more of a swingy version of it, where the band ends on the and of 2, and then sometimes they'll do the chord that's held on beat 4. Another very popular ending used by traditional jazz bands is has a drum tag at the end. Or sometimes it's even other players adding their own little solo tags by themselves. And without a drummer, it's a little bit challenging to demonstrate that, but I'll try and demonstrate that vocally and with the trumpet. So the drummer takes 4 bars after you've done what sounded like an ending, and then you do 4 more bars. And often those 4 more bars at the end are just 2 dominant for measure, 5 dominant for measure, and then 1 for 2 measures. And again, you can end on beat 3 of the last bar or on and of 3 of the last bar. And you can put a chord on the end or a choke cymbal. Also, sometimes after that 4-bar drum tag, you'll go back and play the last 8 bars of the song. But you have to signal that either musically or by saying, putting up 4 twice like that to let them know that you're doing the last 8, or just yell, "Last 8!" So that's another way of doing it. So there you have it. Those are a bunch of ideas about ways of ending the tune as the trumpet player in a traditional jazz band or a New Orleans style jazz band. Those are some of the traditional ways and variations. I hope that's helpful to you, and that you'll be able to make it clear to the guys you're playing with what you're doing.
glass of gin. down, 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 why down, 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 down.
All right, well, that was some of the music by King Oliver. There's a lot out there, and this just barely scratched the surface. He was very, very popular in his time. A lot of these early characters of jazz, especially, their stories don't often end happily. And unfortunately, King Oliver was another such story. He, apparently wasn't a very good business manager or businessman. He lost some gigs that probably would have, catapulted his career. He was offered a position to play at the Cotton Club, for example, in Harlem, and negotiations broke down over money. I think the story was that he demanded maybe too much money, and they instead chose Duke Ellington, and then history goes from there. So he wasn't as good of a businessman as he was a musician. And then the Great Depression occurs in the 1930s, and it's difficult enough, to make a living playing music, much less with the Depression in the background. So he falls onto some hard times, financially speaking. Even to the point where he's taking odd jobs down in Savannah, Georgia. I read something that he was running a fruit stand, and that toward the last year or so of his life, he was a janitor. He had some health problems too, which made it harder and harder for him to play his trumpet. What I also read was that he had a sweet tooth. This led to severe tooth decay and gum disease, and this made it difficult for him to play the instrument. And it got to the point, I think, where he had to give up playing. And I know for a musician that this would be one of the hardest knocks of all. So, he just kind of ends up in obscurity in Savannah, Georgia. He dies in 1938. He's only 52 years old. He dies in absolute poverty. And then his family claims his body in Savannah and take it to New York. My understanding is that he's buried at the Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx in New York. So again, another tragic ending for somebody who was on the top of the world. He was on top of the world. He was on top of on top of his game. He, I don't know. The story that comes to mind, like a modern story, is kind of like the story of MC Hammer. Like, he was hot and he was it, and he made a ton of money, and he just went on a buying spree and bad business decisions and people borrowing money and all these other things. And, the story was about MC Hammer that he ends up going broke too. So, this seems to be a pretty common tale, but I think we can appreciate the genius of King Oliver, and we can definitely appreciate that he was a pivotal character in the history of jazz music, which he was basically a bridge to the second generation jazz players that really codified and standardized the music genre and really popularized it and made it, something that everybody knew around the world. Okay, so I thought I would do something a little bit different with the remaining time I have with y'all today. And, I thought I would give you a little bit of an examination. If this was a real university or community college class, your professor would, give you a test on your knowledge every once in a while. So that's what I've come up with for today. What I did is I found a song that's been recorded by multiple artists spanning early jazz, kind of second generation jazz, and going even into the swing big band era, and even still is recorded today in the modern era. The name of the song is the King Porter Stomp, and it was originally written by Jelly Roll Morton. So what I've done is I've taken the song and I've split it up into 8 different segments. And so each segment is performed by a different artist. And then what I did is after the song is played once through, I've taken the first maybe 10 or 12 seconds of the introduction of the song, and I've replicated the introduction of the song over these same 8 artists. All the tracks are played in the same order. So whatever artist I have started with number 1 goes 1 through 8. That 1 through 8 is the same order in the intro of the song. And what I'd like to see if you can do is by hearing these pieces of music played, the same piece of music played by different artists in their own style and arrangement, if you can identify who the artist is. And so those of you who are going to take the examination, I would like you to send me your answers by email. Send it here to the station, james.udall, UDALL, at jsmradio.com. Send me your examination. Start with, number your email 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and write the name of the artist in the order in which you heard them. I'll give you the artists' names in just no particular order. You've got, we can just start with King Oliver. So I've got his version in here. So we got a King Oliver. We have a Benny Goodman. We have a Jelly Roll Morton. He wrote the song. We have a Louis Armstrong. We've got a Gene Krupa. We've got a Wynton Marsalis. And we've got Fletcher Henderson. And we've got a Sidney Bechet. So I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, that's correct. We've got 8. And if your favorite artist wasn't among these, I apologize. I mean, there are many artists who recorded this song. So listen to this music and see if you can identify who's playing what. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Send your exam to the radio station, to my email address. I can't wait to see who can get them. All right? And, all right, so have fun with it, and I'll catch you at the back end of the exam, and we'll just say goodbye, maybe talk for another minute or two before we end the show. So anyway, good luck, and all right, go for it.
The gentleman was named Porter King, as I before stated, and of course he seemed to have a kind of a yen for my style of playing, although we had 2 different styles playing. And of course he particularly liked this type of number that I was playing, and that was the reason that I named it after him, but not Porter King. I changed the name backwards and named it King Porter Stomp. Now this tune become to be the outstanding favorite of every great hot band throughout the world that had the accomplishments and qualifications of playing it. And until today, this tune has been the cause of many great bands to come to fame. It has caused the outstanding tunes today to use the backgrounds that belong to King Porter in order to make great tunes of themselves.
When did you write this?
This tune was wrote the same year as Alabama Bound in 1905.
You know what's cool about an exercise like that is that you really got the spectrum and the progression of early jazz to kind of intermediate jazz, second generation jazz, and then swing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, 8 artists, send me an email to the station, james.udall@jsmradio.com. Number the email 1 through 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then number 1, put the first artist, second artist, third artist, fourth artist in the order that you heard them. Again, to remind you of the artist, and in no particular order, there was a version of this song, which was the King Porter Stomp, written by Jelly Roll Morton. So there was a Jelly Roll Morton, there was a Wynton Marsalis, there was a Benny Goodman, there was a Gene Krupa, there was a King Oliver, there was a Louis Armstrong, there was a Sidney Bechet, and rounding out the 8, we had a Fletcher Henderson. So send me your answers to the station. Next week, I will grade the examinations, and I will announce the names and cities of the people who got top grades, of our listeners who got the top score. We'll go over the exam again, and I will give the answers. So tune in next week, and I'll then go over the answers. And I think maybe we'll end the show. Every show from now on, we'll do some type of a little quiz or an examination like this. This was, a little bit difficult. I think that it will be challenging to many people. It might be very easy to some others who are really into this genre of music and have been so, But if you've been listening to the Swing Academy for the last several weeks, we've covered many of these artists. We covered Sidney Bechet. We covered Jelly Roll Morton, and like for example, this week we covered King Oliver. So if you want to improve your knowledge of this genre of music, if you want to be able to get 7 out of 8, 8 out of 8 on a test like this, where you hear a piece of music and you say, oh, I know who that was, and that piece of music was such and such, written in such and such year, keep coming back to the Swing Academy. This is where I hope we will all end up some weeks, months, even a year from now. Our collective music knowledge will be so much greater. So with that, I've gone way over time. Again, I always go over time. I apologize. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Thank you for your emails. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your helpful criticisms and critiques. And until next week, have a wonderful week, and I hope you all come back to the Swing Academy. So here comes the sound of the bell, and you know what that means. Class is dismissed. Have a great week, everybody.